apply to anyone else. And if those terms make any of them uncomfortable, then that's not indicative of a problem with the movement. It's indicative of their own sympathies with Zionism. And we do not and should not change to cater to them. They aren't special. It's totally backwards and frankly just kind of bizarre to create a special set of criteria that the movement abide by, effectively neutering it entirely, specifically to appeal to people who happen to share an ethnicity with the dominant ethnic group of an ethno-supremacist project and who often have sympathies with it. And again, I know I must sound like a broken record by now, but the only reason something so clearly ludicrous can even be proposed and taken seriously is due to Jewish exceptionalism. Anyway, so back to the point of the Holocaust needing to be acknowledged as a special genocide. Jones's only real justification for it being so special is that it was industrialized, systemic, and bureaucratic. But pretty much every genocide ever has been systemic. I'm not exactly sure how one could ever not be, and many have been bureaucratic, carried out coldly from the top down, from politician to gun barrel, via laws and legislation. So that leaves us with the industrialized part. I wonder if the people who make this sort of argument even know that until 1942, the Holocaust was mostly carried out with just guns. Around 2 million to 2.5 million of its victims were simply hunted down and shot in the same manner that colonial genocides had been carried out for centuries beforehand. The Nazis, in fact, took direct inspiration from previous colonial genocides in carrying out the Holocaust and considered that conquest of Eastern Europe to be very analogous to the American conquest of the West. Does being killed by guns make the deaths of those Jews less important, less meaningful? Because if it's only the industrialized part that makes the Holocaust special, then yeah, that seems to be the implication. And said implication clearly poses more problems even outside of the context of the Holocaust. What exactly makes a Jew murdered in a gas chamber a more worthy victim than a Native American murdered by US soldiers' bayonets? And what exactly makes a Jew murdered in a Nazi gas chamber more of a victim than the Romani also killed with that same gas? It's an arbitrary distinction. Additionally, the fact that the Holocaust, for years of its duration, was carried out similarly to previous colonial genocides clearly implies that it can actually be compared to them, and that it evolved into the death camp system later had just as much to do with the time and circumstances in which it took place as it did with the brutality of the Nazis. There is no real reason to believe that, in similar circumstances and with similar industrial means, that other genociders, like the Americans of the 19th century, or the Belgians who genocided the Congo, or the Turks who genocided the Armenians, would not have utilized similar methods. If you're interested in an in-depth look at how the Holocaust can very much be compared and contrasted to the other genocides that preceded it, I have a very long and in-depth video on that very topic you might want to check out when you're done here. You're certainly allowed to make a value judgment for the Holocaust being the worst genocide, though I question your motivations for doing so, as the Genocide Olympics is honestly kind of a weird thing to partake in, which is why those who do this generally have an ulterior motive of implying that Israel is uniquely justified by the Holocaust. The thing is, though, that's always going to be an opinion. It's not something that can ever be a fact. Yet those who uphold the Holocaust in this way present their value judgments as if they were incontestable facts and imply or outright state that you are anti-Semitic if you disagree. And even if it were true, and the Holocaust could somehow be scientifically declared as the worst event ever, something that nothing else can or should ever be compared to, that would still not legitimize Jewish ethno-nationalism and settler colonialism in Palestine even slightly. It might explain how some of the colonists came to the decision to colonize Palestine, but an explanation is not a justification. Ultimately, as Norman Finkelstein outlined in his book, The Holocaust Industry, the specific canonization of the Holocaust and this notion that it's offensive to compare it to literally anything else in any capacity at all is strategic. Initially, for 2 decades after World War II, focus on Holocaust remembrance was seen as a communist act designed to hamper West Germany's post-war geopolitical integration into the US-led Western Bloc. The Holocaust only started to be so widely remembered as Westerners remember it today in the aftermath of the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, when Israel proved itself to be very capable of fighting against America's regional opponents, and thereafter became central to the USA's Middle Eastern strategy. Suddenly, focusing on the Holocaust was no longer a communist thing, and this idea that historical Jewish victimhood and especially the Holocaust are things that uniquely legitimize Israel started to be spread far and wide in the West, birthing the Jewish exceptionalist ideology which skews our perceptions of the oppression of the Palestinian people to this very day.
Placing SAM turret.
The last example I'm covering here is probably going to make a lot of you very uncomfortable, but it's no less important. Leave your discomfort at the door and at least try to think objectively here. In November 2023, with the Gaza genocide in its most lethal month, Owen Jones happened upon a tweet that said, "This morning, my community is processing this vandalism at a synagogue in Mercer Island, a suburb of Seattle. What does this accomplish?" Attached was a video showing anti-genocide slogans written on the walls of a synagogue. Jones was quick to jump at this chance to performatively denounce anti-Semitism, and I guess sort of prove to the Zionists who call him anti-Semitic that he's actually not, amplifying an ongoing campaign by Zionists to frame this event as evidence of an anti-Semitism crisis, supposedly caused by those opposed to the Gaza genocide, which in their warped minds would legitimize said genocide. But what he actually should have done here is to ask questions about this, as you should in any case about anything, like what synagogue is this? Is there perhaps a political reason that these anti-genocide slogans may have been written on its walls outside, rather than just, as he claimed, age-old anti-Jewish hate? As it turns out, yes, this synagogue is the Herzl Ner Tamid Zionist Synagogue. They proudly explain that their core tenets are the ideals of social justice, equality, and a strong support for Israel. Now, if you didn't know, Theodor Herzl is the founder of the racist colonial ideology of political Zionism and is considered by the Israeli state to be the spiritual father of the nation. Herzl was not at all religious. He considered Jewishness to be sort of a nationality and ethnicity. So a religious institution naming themselves after a very much secular figure like that is not doing so because of his religious holiness or anything like that. They're doing it because they agree with his racist ideology. This synagogue's head rabbi is Jacob Herber, a leader of AIPAC's Washington State chapter. Yes, the notorious American pro-Israel lobby organization. Let us imagine some analogous scenarios. There's a mosque called the Osama bin Laden Al-Qaeda Mosque, headed by an imam who is a member of the More 9/11s lobby. Someone graffitis the mosque with anti-9/11 slogans. Is that an anti-Muslim attack? I don't think so. How about a church called, say, the Hitler KKK Church, led by a card-carrying member of the Ku Klux Klan? Would it be anti-Christian discrimination to vandalize said church with anti-white supremacist slogans? Again, I don't think so. You might think these scenarios are not analogous, but you're wrong, and that's the problem. They are. That's the entire point of this video, to challenge this idea that Zionism should be an exception just because it's an ideology that claims to represent Jews. Naming a synagogue after the founder of a genocidal settler colonial ideology and advocating for that ideology is no less vile than naming a mosque after Osama bin Laden and advocating for his ideology would be. Actually, it's a whole lot worse, because Zionism has hurt way more people than bin Laden ever did. Does that mean that this vandalism was a good idea? No, God no. The people who did it should have known how it would be framed, and that nearly everyone, including supposed allies like Owen Jones, would ignore the genocidal ideology that the synagogue openly advocates for to paint this as little more than the most crude and basic manifestation of anti-Semitism. So it's just immensely stupid. There's hundreds of better targets for such a protest. You know, going after an Israel supplying arms company or something like that is probably as risky as this, yet comes with none of the baggage. Anyone who actually seeks to provide context was always going to be drowned out in a sea of performative denunciations of anti-Semitism by Zionists frothing at the mouth to weaponize anything that they can get their hands on to legitimize genocide. But that doesn't mean that the act itself was actually anti-Semitic. The institution that was targeted clearly venerates Zionism, to the extent that it's named after the ideology's founder, openly and proudly declares support for Israeli ethno-nationalist settler colonialism as its core value, and is led by members of the worst pro-Israel lobby organization in the world. Protesting against such an institution on the basis of its abhorrent politics is not at all anti-Semitic. Just like it wouldn't be anti-Christian to say, protest the Russian Orthodox Church that supports the war in Ukraine, which has actually been done, by the way. It's only due to Jewish exceptionalism that these sorts of zero-context condemnations can fly so easily, without anyone daring to ask if there may have been a political basis to the protest. Some Jewish institutions very much do support the abhorrent Zionist ideology, and it shouldn't be taboo to acknowledge that fact, yet it very much is. And this is the core of the problem here. We need to conceive of Zionism for what it is: abhorrent, unacceptable, racist, ethnic supremacist, colonial, and we need to fight it in the same uncompromising way that we would any other similar ideology. Yet even some who paint themselves as pro-Palestinian, with many adoring fans who hang on their every word, outright argue against even understanding Israel in such terms, implying that it's anti-Semitic to accurately analyze, diagnose, and describe the problem. Jewish exceptionalism is so pervasive that such positions can be presented as being pro-Palestinian when they're clearly anything but. By abiding to this framework and its limitations, we ultimately do the work of Zionism. We funnel people right into it, whether we mean to or not. Each of us who does so is contributing to its continuation and helping in our own little way to ensure that events like what we have seen recently in Gaza will keep repeating cyclically far into the future. There's a really interesting clip from, of all people, far-right white supremacist media personality Tucker Carlson. The context is that Carlson was criticized by the ADL for him framing immigration to the USA as the ethnic replacement of what he heavily implied was white people, which according to his complaint would eventually make them a minority. This was his response.
Go to the Anti-Defamation League's website sometime if you'd like a glimpse of what an unvarnished conversation about a country's national interest might look like. In a short essay posted to the site, the ADL explains why the state of Israel should not allow more Arabs to become citizens with voting rights. Quote, with historically high birth rates among the Palestinians and a possible influx of Palestinian refugees and their descendants now living around the world, the ADL explained, Jews would quickly become a minority within a binational state, thus likely ending any semblance of equal representation and protection. In this situation, the Jewish population would be increasingly politically and potentially physically vulnerable. It is unrealistic and unacceptable, the ADL continues, to expect the state of Israel to voluntarily subvert its own sovereign existence and nationalist identity and become a vulnerable minority within what was once its own territory, end quote. Now, from Israel's perspective, this makes perfect sense. Why would any democratic nation make its own citizens less powerful? Isn't that the deepest betrayal of all? In the words of the ADL, why would a government subvert its own sovereign existence? Good question. Maybe ADL President Jonathan Greenblatt will join us sometime to explain and tell us whether that same principle applies to the United States.
That's just hilarious, isn't it? The ADL have the gall to tell others that their ethno-nationalism is wrong while they openly advocate for it for Jews in Israel. Like it's the most normal thing ever. Just openly fear-mongering about Palestinians being a demographic threat to Israel's Jewish majority. And barely anyone even notices the contradiction. Everyone just sort of nods along. All because of Jewish exceptionalism. Carlson's conclusion that if Israel can do it, we should be able to do it too is obviously wrong. But he's not wrong at all in identifying the fact that this is a clear double standard. It's abhorrent, disgusting, and unacceptable in both cases, and it needs to be properly perceived as such. There is an excellent article by the Palestinian activist Mohammed al-Kurd, whose family home in Jerusalem was stolen by the Israeli state and given to the Jewish settlers. It's titled, "Jewish Settlers Stole My House. It's not my fault they're Jewish." It is precisely about the very chilling effect that our abiding to Jewish exceptionalism has, even on Palestinians like himself, who feel like they can't even speak openly and frankly about what's being done to them just because it's being done by people who happen to be Jewish. A Palestinian's perceived resentment doesn't have the backing of a Knesset to codify it into law. Tropes aren't drones, nor can one convert conspiracy theories into nuclear weapons. We are past the early 1900s. Things are different. Power has shifted. Words are not murder. Here is where I stand. There is a Jew who lives by force in half of my home in Jerusalem, and he does so by divine decree. Many others reside, by force, in Palestinian houses, while their owners linger in refugee camps. It isn't my fault that they're Jewish. I have zero interest in memorizing or apologizing for centuries-old tropes created by Europeans, or in giving semantics more heft than they warrant. Chiefly, when millions of us confront real, tangible oppression, living behind cement walls or under siege or in exile, and living with woes too expansive to summarize. I'm tired of the impulse to preemptively distance myself from something of which I am not guilty, and I'm particularly tired of the assumption that I'm inherently bigoted. I am tired of the pearl-clutching pretense that should such animosity exist, its existence would be inexplicable and rootless. And most of all, I'm tired of the false equivalence between semantic violence and systemic violence. The idea that we must all police ourselves on Palestine because of which ethnic group happens to be oppressing the Palestinians must die. Because as long as it remains alive, we're going to be preventing ourselves from even diagnosing the problem, let alone moving towards a solution. And we will be doing a disservice to Mohammed and to every other Palestinian. In fact, even worse, we'll be enabling the continuation of the problem. Zionism, in all its variants, is an unacceptable Jewish supremacist ideology, and Israel is the real-world manifestation of its core Jewish supremacist tenets in practice. It's time to stop pretending otherwise. Time to stop allowing ourselves to be misled by anyone who says otherwise. And especially time to stop acting like those who victimize Palestinians are victims themselves. They aren't. To effectively challenge Zionism and Israel, we must free ourselves from the notion that there's anything special about them just because they're for Jews. We must treat them the same as we would neo-Nazis, white supremacists, or any other ethno-supremacist movement, because that's what they are. Only then will we have a chance of ever getting anywhere. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this and you'd like to see more like it, subscribe to my channel. And if you really liked it and you would like to support me so that I continue to make more stuff like this, then you can head on over to my Patreon or Ko-fi where you can become a monthly supporter, or on Ko-fi you can also send one-time donations. Now just like
Enemy RCXD detected.
You got baited into doing drama? I mean, you're right. You bring 3 monitors? No, I always bring 1 monitor. He's not fat man. He's skinny man bad. You were looking at Barack Ravid's tweet too? Someone who isn't even anti-Israel? Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, this is like... That's the funniest part about this process is that, like, people say, like, oh, Hassan, you're a supporter or whatever, right? And it's like, I'm relying on Israeli news for most of my coverage. Okay. By the way, you have to see this one. Ethan Klein in his latest display of ignorance refers to the Israelis attacking 8 convoys as benign dudes who look like they're doing charity. Just in case you were wondering why he's so afraid to debate Hassan directly about such issues. These inbred douchebags in the background.
Like, these are just dudes standing back there.
Entirely
like,
comprised of messy.
And this is an ongoing like joke with this community. These are just fucking benign dudes. Just I don't know what the they're doing. It looks like they're doing charity.
I know what they're doing. Yeah, that's awesome. He said they look like they're just benign dudes, look like they're doing charity. They're literally far right Jewish supremacist fascists. They're not doing charity, big dog. They're stealing. They're stealing the UNRWA aid. They're stealing the aid. And the people filming them are actually describing what they're doing. It's on the video. This is why I'm saying, like, what a ridiculous person, man. I don't know why he's still doing it.
Or something. Looks like they've got water or box.
He also doesn't understand, like, look, he does not understand this very important part of the conversation is that like you can get pro-Israel news virtually everywhere in mainstream media. Okay? Everything is massaged in a way to make it seem as though Israel is not a fascist state doing a genocide, even when everything that is observable points to that reality. Right? There's a reason why people come to me to hear this side, even if they don't fully agree with my ideology, with the way I see the world. There are plenty of people who disagree with me and yet still rely on my coverage to develop a different understanding, to see what the other side's perspective is on certain issues. Okay? I do not hide my biases. I do not shelter you from that. Okay? I openly tell you what it is. But if you clip it in this way and go, oh, he's being racist towards Jewish people, he's being anti-Semitic, yeah, sure, you can get some people to believe that. But it is like, but you're just doing a disservice. You're doing a disservice to your audience, and you're doing a disservice to the truth.
I'll do something like they're helping, and he's going, oh, look at these inbred fucks. It's like, bro, who are you? Who are you? Like, how dare you?
Guys, the Israeli police is investigating the attack on the Gaza aid convoy.
Israeli security forces are paid to stop this happening. They either could not or would not, but clearly did not prevent Israeli settlers attacking an aid convoy yesterday. from the West Bank bound for Gaza, where, say aid agencies, hundreds of thousands of civilians face famine.
But during the unloading and loading, settlers attack these trucks, destroying the products and burning them in a systematic act of sabotage.
A continuation of...
Dude, they're so benign. They're being so benign. I'm very much not so left-leaning, but I 100% tune in whenever I want to hear the full story for any given geopolitical topic. Thank you for the content. There it is. That's it. You might not agree with me, but I'll show you my work every time. And you might have realized at this point that suspiciously, people who constantly say I'm spreading falsehoods will never actually show the full context and then constantly chirp about how I'm not watching these videos. Well, here's one aspect of the coverage and commentary that they do.
It is seen yesterday as settlers destroyed food at the same crossing point.
It's just bad faith. And he cries about 2-hour compilation. You got baited into doing drama? I mean, you're right. Did you bring 3 monitors? No, I always bring 1 monitor. He's not fat man. He's skinny man bad. You were looking at Barack Ravid's tweet too. Someone who isn't even anti-Israel. Yeah, that's the other thing. I mean, this is like, that's the funniest part about this process is that like, people say like, oh, Hassan, you're a terror supporter or whatever, right? And it's like, I'm relying on Israeli news for most of my coverage. Okay? I feel like 95% of internet discourse is this, people going in circles about things that are easily verifiable law. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more of that than Palestinian news. Yeah, all right, let's move on. Serious, with Elon taking over the treasury and stealing who knows how much info, is there a US for you to come back to, wondering where to escape? There's no way that you can escape the United States anyway. That's not a thing that you can do. What did you think about Canada targeting specifically red states and some of their retaliation? I think it's a weird way to approach it because there are plenty of wonderful people that live in the red states as well. But like, I mean, I think universal tariffs is understandable as a retaliatory measure regardless. You know what I mean? Genuine question, why do you call yourself a socialist and not a communist? I don't care. I call myself a leftist regardless. I don't even usually call myself a socialist. I don't care what people call me. I don't care about these labels. You can call me whatever you want. I call myself a capitalist too.
We got a rat.
Oh shit, Shibuya boys. This is a beautiful work of art. You just call yourself a Marxist? Exactly. Ethan Klein claims the Houthis brought back the second source he cites as an Al Jazeera documentary that it makes it clear within the first 2 minutes that they're reporting on a time period beginning at least 4 years prior to the Houthi takeover.
I almost forgot the most fun one. They brought back.
You think the Houthis, Ansar Allah, is doing...
I almost forgot.
This is an investigation in Yemen, with local journalists and human rights campaigners forming part of the Al Jazeera team. In June 2010, a local Yemeni newspaper, Al Masdar, reported that not only existed, but was growing in Yemen. It published the story of 500 alleged slaves in the country.
Hostile RCXD in your AO. What the fuck's going on out there? Check that aim, shot for brains.
Yeah, the first headline is Saudi propaganda article that says sources say all that. The first source he cites is a paper owned by a member of the Saudi family, the ruling family of Saudi Arabia. They've been fighting a war against the Houthis, their geopolitical enemy, since 2014. I've literally covered this article on stream before. Stop clicking links. Okay, you're right. I should stop clicking links. Oh, this is my favorite way. Okay, going back to domestic politics and not like Ethan Klein. One of my favorite things that the Republicans are doing. Is this, where they present like obviously anti-American consumer-related issues in a way where they bring up the culture war to make it seem like it's a good thing, right? Here, and you'll see a lot more of this. It's like the whole actually paying more for eggs is patriotic, and you're too like soy cucked and a libtard to understand that. Like it's shit like that, basically. I hope someone makes a video countering all of Ethan's points soon, so I don't have to actually watch Ethan's video. I mean, you can if you want to. I don't give a shit. Go watch Ethan's video. That's the thing that I think a lot of his community doesn't understand. Like, they think that I'm like afraid of this video or something, when it's like it's all bad face smears that I've addressed a million times over. A fucking congressperson working alongside Sex Pestany literally compiled some of those clips out of context in a congressional header letterhead that they sent to Twitch. You think I'm not familiar with these clips? I know where they come from. They come from a website that is now defunct, but used to exist, that started off on October 10th, 2023. Okay? October 10th, 2023. The website was called hamasabi.com, where a compilation of clips where I will be advocating for something that is clipped out of context to make it seem like I'm advocating against said thing would appear on that website on a daily basis. These guys literally saw a genocide unfolding in the aftermath of October 7 and thought, how can we make this about Hassan and attacking Hassan? It's psychotic. You put the Hamas headband on you in this video. I don't really care. Also, Al Jazeera isn't a reliable source on Yemen, given their involvement in the genocide and support of the pro-Saudi government. No, the Al Jazeera documentary is literally criticizing Saudi-backed slavery in Yemen back in 2010. The Saudi news was claiming it was the Houthis actually in 2014 and beyond. Al Jazeera never claimed slavery was because of the Houthis. When you say the Burger Reich is here, should we actually be concerned about death camps and need to get out? I'm trans, or is that kind of fear-mongering? All my foreign friends think I'm going to get gassed any day now. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be death camps. He really got upset. Philly D's video did not cover y'all's drama. When the world was falling apart, he said he didn't even mention me and Hassan. Why would he do that? There is like 700 things that are incredibly prescient and much more important to cover than rehashing the same clips out of context that people have been blasting on the timeline in perpetuity for the past 16 months at this point, with the backdrop of it being a fucking genocide. Ridiculous. Bro, the fact that you answered, I don't know, the death camps kind of says it all. Well, it's because it's not going to happen yet, okay? It's not. But that's the whole point. The Madagascar plan was simply a plan of mass deportation of Jews in Germany, right? That's how it starts. So I don't know where it goes, and it's entirely dependent on the level of resistance that comes after. It's also somewhat dependent on the incompetence of the leadership in implementing these initiatives. One of the only things that we can rely on at this point is not necessarily the Democratic Party, who has done a piss poor job of fighting back against these sorts of things, but perhaps the sheer incompetence of those at the administrative body, kind of like the whole "we tried to do a coup in Venezuela and failed" attitude. You know what I mean? But there are some funny moments that take place in this process, such as this one, where the Trump administration will do something horrible. What? Honestly, don't think Ethan is a bad person. Think he just went down a rabbit hole. Think if he said fucked it. Think if he said I fucked up, you'd be fine with him again. Don't feel that you are that petty. I mean, he spent an entire year, but yeah, as long as he apologized and made it right, and not to me, by the way, but to like all of the people that he's smeared in bad faith and try to make it up to them, I don't really care. I don't even care if he just stopped talking about me or Israel in particular. Like, I don't know if I'll ever view him in the same light ever again, but it's not even for my own brand or my own personal success or whatever. I think it's like good for his own mental health as well. Good for his own community if he just like stopped these ridiculous things that he's doing. Anyway, we're getting sucked into drama again. This is irrelevant. All right.
On having Rita get her surgical interventions. Why Amelia needs a lawyer to help her do any of this is anyone's guess, but okay. But Rita rightly notes that transitioning takes time. But Amelia then, still male presenting, unbuttons her shirt to reveal that she's been on hormones for 2 years and has already developed breasts. Rita gasps.
Empecé el tratamiento hace 2 años.
Oh my God, she has boobs, like gasp, but how scary. But the ambiguous emotion of this reaction has ignited significant discourse, with some critics dissecting it as a possible window into the director's overall perspective on transition and trans bodies. Is it disgust how boobs on a male-presenting person are gross? Is it surprise? Or is it something else entirely? But as trans critic Tilly Bridges on her amazing Tilly's Trans Tuesday podcast pointed out,
I've seen some folks say this was a gasp of disgust. I've seen some people say this was a gasp of surprise. What I want you to know is that either way, this is showing transition as a surprise and something to be shocked by. It's showing you trans people are duplicitous. See what she was hiding from you?
We've already, this early into the film, seen Amelia's personality be tied to violence and manipulation, but now her transition is being tied into it as well. And here's where we're beginning to see the problematic intertwining between transness and the film's core thematic question. Can you ever truly change who you are inside? In a later scene in the movie, an Israeli surgeon sings,
You know, I only fix the body, skin, bones, but I will never fix the soul. If he's a he, she'll be a he. If he's a she, she'll be a she. If he's a wolf, she'll be a wolf. If he's the wolf, you'll be his sheep.
arguing that identity remains unchanged despite any physical transformation. But Rita counters,
changing the body changes society. Changing society changes the soul. Changing the soul changes society. Changing society changes it all.
Suggesting that transformation is deeply tied to identity and the soul itself. We'll get around to the context of this conversation in a second because it's a doozy, but this is the core philosophical dialectic that the film wants to grapple with. Is there an essential core to who someone is that's unchangeable, as the doctor argues, or, as Rita contends, can changing one's body, transitioning, reshape not only how society perceives a person, but also how they experience themselves and their place in the world? And this debate is an intriguing one often central to narratives that trans people like myself are drawn to both enjoying and also writing. There's a large trans fandom around stories of body modification, like those seen in the cyberpunk or body horror genres, because they often reflect questions of the ways changes to the body can or cannot reshape identity and self-perception, and also how our physical body exists within society.
The basic point is that one is not born a woman, but rather becomes one, that the body is not a fact.
I actually recently spoke about in another video about David Cronenberg's Videodrome and how that film explores how technology can lead us to question and transform our own bodies, while also showing how such transformation can be directed and weaponized by systems of control like governments, militaries, and corporations. Similarly, the entirety of the cyberpunk genre frames body modification as aligning external reality with internal identity, allowing you to change your body to add in whatever abilities you want, but also highlights the tension between this personal autonomy and the corporatized systems that commodify these modifications and thus pit self-expression against oppression. And trans creators often explore these ideas in ways that underscore autonomy. The cyberpunk The Matrix often uses body horror to show Neo's body being invaded and controlled by agents of the state, and also has him quite literally take a metaphorical hormone pill to choose to take agency over his body and fight back against how society controls him. Even more recently, the trans-directed I Saw the TV Glow presents Owen, a trans-coded protagonist whose refusal to embrace his true body becomes a matter of survival as his socially acceptable, perfect worker body quickly decays. It's a visceral body horror metaphor for how society exploits and consumes us when we deny our authenticity in order to fit its mold. Both examples underscore how the fight for bodily autonomy and self-definition against oppressive systems that try to control and define it is a core part of trans narratives, both in fiction and in reality.
The body cannot live without the mind.
And these stories echo Judith Butler's ideas about identity as a performance shaped by societal expectations rather than a fixed truth.
Now, what if we were to say that in enacting our lives as a particular gender, we are actually realizing that gender anew? We are making something real happen. When gay and lesbian people started coming out, or when trans people started living openly, something changed in the world. When we talk about performative, we're talking about an act that make something come into being or an act that has real consequences. We're talking about the changing of reality.
But these genres aren't inherently immune to also reflecting dominant cis-heteronormative patriarchal fears. Take, for example, the concept of cyberpsychosis in Cyberpunk 2077 and its anime, Cyberpunk Edgerunners. It's a mental illness where excessive cybernetic body modification causes people to lose touch with reality and turn violent against anyone around them, even their friends. And this idea frames the body as core to what makes us human, portraying those who change their natural form as slowly losing their grip on both reality and humanity, the way humanity should be. It echoes transphobic narratives that portray trans people as delusional and mentally ill by thinking that we're our actual genders, and sees our bodies as mutilated and inhuman, and also frame trans women, as well as the mentally ill, as inherently violent. And this exact rhetoric is what's weaponized to justify systemic violence and the stripping away of our autonomy. I'd also highly recommend, by the way, this excellent video by Broe Deschanel, which explores body horror and how movies like The Substance sometimes reflect societal fears of women's bodies. Not just trans women, but of the broader objectification and disgust at all women's bodies used to police our autonomy.
Because what I was watching was an explicitly feminist film about women's beauty standards, and here I was surrounded by an audience screaming at the body of an old woman.
But I bring up cyberpunk and body horror not just because, I'm a nerd, but because they're heightened examples of the same ideas raised in discussions about trans people in a modern context, or conversely, framed as a threat to ingrained cultural beliefs that uphold the status quo, that have made themselves feel normalized. Beliefs that label those who change as intrinsically dangerous to said status quo and in need of being controlled and confined. Which brings us back, sadly, to Emilia Perez. The film toys with the same themes of bodily autonomy and societal control, yet this scene between Rita and the doctor centers entirely on two cis people discussing a trans woman's transition, completely excluding Emilia from the conversation. And at no point in the film does Emilia articulate what a specific kind of transition she wants. She just vaguely says she wants to transition and get surgeries. No trans woman would never want to say in their own transition, and it's a blatant stripping of her autonomy by the film, reinforcing the persistent pattern of cis people getting to dictate the terms of transition. But what's worse is that Rita's argument here rings entirely hollow, because while it contradicts her earlier belief that appearances equate to truth, her shift in perspective was not driven by genuine growth on her part, but by Emilia's violently attacking Rita to get her to speed up her transition process in the scene that happens directly prior to this one. Rita's plea to the doctor isn't a genuine challenge on her part to societal assumptions, it's a desperate attempt for her to avoid further violence, framing the support of trans autonomy and the rejection of patriarchal expectations as something coerced through fear and threat of violence from a trans woman. Again, Emilia's violent character being tied directly to her being trans. And so we're already seeing a pattern of Emilia Perez the movie relying on cis fears and biases, raising the question of if it genuinely understands the narratives around trans people that it seeks to interrogate. Because we need to talk about the song.
From penis to vagina.
The one where Rita is paraded a magical buffet of trans surgeries like it's some kind of transgender surgery Candyland. Actually, I trademarked that idea because I would love to make a trans surgery Candyland. I claim that. Come with me and you'll see a world of gender affirmation. But naturally, as I said, this song became a favorite for trans folks to roast online because it so perfectly captures society's fixation on surgeries as the defining feature of our lives. I even found that some trans people who hadn't seen the movie felt that the song must have been intended to be a tongue-in-cheek parody of the fetishized way that cisgender people turn our surgeries into a spectacle by making it a big musical number. Oh God, I'm gonna fall over. Because otherwise, who wouldn't love their personal healthcare decisions, including those about our genitals, be turned into a whimsical ditty? Whimsical ditty. Whimsical ditty. And to be fair, in context, while the song is meant to be over the top and funny, it sadly lacks that self-awareness. Because in the film, the comedy is instead meant to come from how freely these surgeries are supposedly handed out.
Mammoplasty. Yes. Vaginoplasty.
Yes.
rhinoplasty,
Yes.
laryngoplasty,
Yes.
mammoplasty,
Yes.
vaginoplasty,
Yes.
rhinoplasty,
Yes.
laryngoplasty.
The surgery center we see here is based in Thailand, a country in real life that has relatively lax restrictions on trans surgeries, which has led it to become a vital destination for some trans people who've been denied care or face incredibly long wait times or prohibitive costs in their home countries due to restrictive laws or gatekeeping. Yeah, the film glosses over that harsh reality. Instead, it asks us to laugh at and judge how absurdly easy it is for Rita, a cisgender person, to casually select surgeries for a trans person, reducing these deeply personal and often inaccessible decisions to something as trivial as pointing at every surgery and yelling, "Yes, yes, yes!"
Yes, 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 yes.
As if she's picking them out at a buffet. Adding to this, the sequence parades stereotypically beautiful naked bodies of men and women around, reinforcing the notion that transition is about achieving some objectified, idealized, sexualized form. This perpetuates the idea that trans women transition to fulfill a fetishized, sexualized version of womanhood, that we're just sexual perverts who wish to become the object of our sexual desire, which is a common transphobic narrative called autogynephilia. And it negates that we're actually women and instead frames us as moral degenerate perverts. I mean, I am a moral degenerate pervert, but it has nothing to do with me being trans. On top of that, the Thai doctor's office is a massive, flashy, and clearly expensive. And throughout the song, the cost of surgeries is repeatedly emphasized.
Please, just for the bath. How much will it be? For you, $4,500.
And this portrayal directly feeds the idea that trans surgeries are handed out like candy by a medical industry eager to exploit and profit off of trans people. So much anti-trans propaganda hinges on this exact claim, that the medical establishment is pushing trans identities through media and culture in order to profit by mutilating us, especially children. It's the same bullshit that right-wing assholes like Matt Walsh are peddling.
We have 5 children's hospitals in the United States telling girls that they can be boys at $70,000 a pop.
Minors are being given surgery by the woke left the second you look away from your kids' schools. Oh my God! Like, calm down, bitch. Trans people aren't the damn weeping angels from Doctor Who.
It's locked.
No kids are getting these surgeries. Trans adults can barely get them. It's a toxic lie used to justify the outright banning of trans healthcare, and this portrayal in the movie plays right into that rhetoric. Not only that, this, alongside Amelia's lack of involvement in choosing her own transition, implies that surgeries are one-size-fit-all for trans people. It leans into the trans medicalist trope that pathologizes being trans and says that transition requires a pre-selected surgical path of treatment in order to be valid. But being trans isn't something you treat. Being trans is just desiring to be seen as not your birth gender, which requires zero medicalization. Numerous medical organizations throughout the world all agree on this, and every trans person has their own specific desires about how they want to transition, and none of them make you any less trans. Even, and especially, if you don't want to get any type of medical intervention. Take that from someone who's literally had pretty much all of them. This implication becomes even more apparent when Rita visits the aforementioned Israeli doctor, who is portrayed with far more respect than the Thai surgeon, which also hints at this movie's racist undertones, but we'll get there. But working out of a tiny, modest office, this surgeon shows little interest in the large sum of money that Rita offers him.
He has tons of money.
Okay. So?
Instead, his focus is framed as concern for whether Amelia is truly trans. He even insists on meeting Amelia before performing any surgeries, a request the film frames as brave, because Rita warns him of the risks of potential violence from Amelia, which the doctor valiantly dismisses.
Can I meet him?
That depends.
Oh, what a hero. On the surface, the doctor's desire to meet Amelia before taking any medical intervention makes 100% sense. Trans people should have access to doctors and the freedom to explore their transition goals with them, to be able to discuss with them as well as family members and therapists what medical interventions that they may want, if any, without any judgment or pressure towards a specific outcome. However, most trans people can't even afford that, and even if we do, we often aren't given that. Because the film elevates the doctor as a wise caretaker while ignoring how that exact affirming, non-judgmental care is often gatekept by the same mentality in the medical establishment that he is reflecting. Because as we see, the doctor's prerequisites aren't about understanding Amelia as a person. We see that it's only done so that he can go and hear Amelia, and thereby us as the audience, deliver the expected sob story of gender dysphoria that she experienced her whole life so that she can justify to him getting surgeries.
I have always been two. My real self and the beast that follows me like a shadow. Pero ya no puedo más. Pensé cientos de veces en quitarme la vida. Pero no es justo desaparecer sin haber vivido tu propia vida. Help me, doctor. This is my only hope to live my own life.
And this reflects the harsh reality of medical gatekeeping trans people face, where even in places offering care, we're forced to prove the necessity of our procedures for our mental health to cisgender authorities, be they doctors or insurance. Navigating the healthcare system as a trans person often means enduring invasive scrutiny just to access necessary care. I mean, to get my own vaginoplasty, I was required to have my therapist write a detailed letter, including a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, in order to satisfy my insurance company's prerequisite. And this letter divulged deeply personal aspects of my life, including descriptions of how I felt about my genitals at 10 years old. The whole process was not only invasive, but also deeply humiliating, especially considering that to this day, that letter is sitting somewhere in an insurance office that anyone can read. And when I pursued my breast augmentation surgery, the plastic surgeon, who readily performed that procedure for cisgender women without any question, insisted that I pay a second therapist to get yet another letter to confirm to him that I wouldn't regret getting the surgery. And he demanded this despite the fact that studies have indicated that regret rates for such procedures are actually higher for his cisgender patients than for transgender individuals. And my experience is reflective of the systemic mess that is transgender healthcare. And this medicalization fuels gatekeeping, forcing us to meet rigid criteria and collect endless professional endorsements just to access basic gender-affirming care. It's also worth mentioning here that Amelia can easily afford all of these surgeries. Money is no object for her thanks to her wealth from her criminal activities. And while that makes sense for her character within the film, most trans people don't have that luxury. Many can't afford surgeries out of pocket, or even the insurance that might pay for them if they even live in an area where such inclusive coverage is available. And even if it's covered, it can be a bureaucratic nightmare just to get approval. At its core, this system thrives on mistrust and control over our bodies, delaying vital care and feeding harmful narratives that constantly question the legitimacy of who we are. And if you're curious about all of this, I'd recommend Abigail Thorne's fantastic video on this situation as it appears in the United Kingdom. Yet, while it depicts them accurately, the film frames these dehumanizing medical hurdles as necessary and the gatekeepers like this doctor as heroic. It also reflects a so-called progressive approach to trans acceptance, less openly hateful than right-wing rhetoric, but still rooted in belittlement and control. Liberals embrace trans people only on their terms, through pathologization and medicalization, letting them feel virtuous without confronting their biases or giving up power over our lives. It's not acceptance, it's control condescendingly disguised as compassion. And through all of this, we can see that while Amelia Perez, the film, tries to wrestle with the philosophical question of whether people can genuinely change through a transgender character, it completely muddies it by making Amelia's transition something dictated, judged, and controlled by cisgender gatekeepers. Instead of engaging with the autonomy and humanity of trans people, our ability to define our transitions and what they mean for us, the film shamelessly reinforces the same cis biases, transphobic narratives, and oppressive structures that dictate and control trans lives, all while pretending to question them. And worst of all, it extends this framework to how Amelia views her transition. Because we finally get a glimpse of Amelia's inner world about a third of the way into the movie in the song Deseo, Desire. The song is sung ostensibly to give us insight into Amelia's emotions, but we're still watching it through Rita's perspective, the only person who witnesses the song. Rita, this far into the film, is still acting as the surrogate for the presumed cis audience's response to Amelia's reveal of her true emotions, making them something to be otherized. Sympathized with, sure, but not empathized with. Compounding the idea that trans people are just objects to be pitied, not real people with real problems. Still, in a raw and undeniably powerful performance by Gascon, the song lays bare Amelia's longing, not to transition, but to become someone else entirely. Though Amelia has everything society tells her she should want, her true desire is to become the post-transition Amelia, whom she views as a completely different person from herself at this moment. And this is striking because it frames Amelia's view of her transition not as a reclamation of identity, but as a rejection of her current self.
We've given up the lead.
Enemy drone charge.
Treating transition as an escape of who she is, a shedding of her violent present in order to fully embody someone new in the future that she's been dreaming about. And this, again, has a kernel of truth in it, because in real life, trans people have wrestled with the idea of whether transition represents stepping into a completely new self or a continuation of the self that we've been for however long we've been alive. For much of the 20th century, the dominant narrative around trans people framed transition as a way of becoming someone else, that we were a person born in the wrong body that was finally stepping into the idealized body that we longed to be. Many trans people, particularly in earlier generations, embraced this narrative, cutting all ties to their pre-transition lives and even sometimes destroying artifacts of their past. And it's a view that I have a lot of understanding for, especially as it was often done as much out of safety as it was for an emotional choice. But this view is rooted in the binary biological essentialism that dominates Western culture, where men and women are seen as oppositional, inherently separate things. This binary often forces men to be seen as inherently strong because they're supposedly innately violent and aggressive, while women are emotional and therefore delicate, needing protection through ownership. Femininity and vulnerability in this framework is treated as inherent weakness, and it reinforces a rigid hierarchy. And trans people who cross these boundaries are viewed as transgressors of this so-called natural order, disrupting the supposed innate gender roles and the hierarchy that it upholds. But in many other non-Western European cultures, gender non-conforming identities were and are seen as integral to society, and men and women were not viewed as diametrically opposed or hierarchical. And it's why, as the early 21st century brought more mainstream attention to trans people in Western culture, and transphobia initially seemed to be on the decline. I'm tired. The dominant narrative idea of transitioning as becoming someone else started to lose traction, replaced by the view that transition was a way to align one's external appearance with their internal truth, a continuation of the self rather than a reinvention of it. And for many trans people, this reframing was actually really liberating for us, offering a way to embrace our identities without the need to erase our past. And it also combines quite nicely with Judith Butler's idea of the performativity of gender. By changing how we perform our roles, we're actively taking agency in reshaping and redefining our identities. And this, in turn, transforms the society around us by creating new roles and plays for how we build it. And this view challenges that rigid binary construct of gender, emphasizing that identity is not fixed or innate, but fluid and continually negotiated through our interactions with societal expectations, an idea that is dangerous to a culture that propagandizes itself as the natural way of things. And we see these two views come into conflict within Amelia. While Amelia seeks to become a wholly new person, she also still has a strong emotional tether to her current life because of her family. Amelia's plan to fake her death and abandon her wife and children is marked by visible anguish on her part, with her tears underscoring the regret and pain of this decision. And while a more modern view of transness would see her try to transition by integrating her family into her changing role, which many trans people today try to do because we want to often stay with our children and family, even if it might cause tension with how we are perceived by them, instead, Amelia believes a completely clean break is necessary for her to become the woman that she longs to be seen as. And this question is further complicated by Amelia's identity as a cartel drug lord, a figure who has clearly enacted significant violence to secure her power. The film doesn't shy away from showing Amelia's brutality through her violent treatment of Rita, but it does leave the broader implications of her crimes, including kidnapping and drug trafficking, mainly off screen, which is something we're going to come back to a little bit later when we talk about racism in the movie. But her ability to fully finance her transition is also directly tied to this violence and exploitation. And this could have been an interesting avenue for the film to explore, using this tension between views of transition used as a way to mirror the criminal side of Amelia's life. The idea that you can't erase your guilt or the harm that you caused simply through reinvention. and how the ability to even reinvent yourself often comes from privilege and exploitation. The film could have subtly used these dueling tensions to confront Western society's pervasive desire to erase history as a way to dodge accountability and deny that privilege even exists, such as how American conservatives insist that slavery is all in the past and that its legacy has not led to the existence of systemic racism and white supremacy that benefits the white rich upper class to this present day, claiming that wealthy white men who started off already with a bunch of money from their families just simply pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, while minorities who have had their money stolen from them for centuries just aren't good enough, and the few successful ones are dismissed as DEI tokens. But despite all of this rich potential, given the film's already displayed biases, we have to continue to question as we go through this if we're heading more to a reinforcement of these same biologically essentialist views that have long misrepresented and been used to constrain trans lives. Spoiler, yes we are. Because the film goes on to frame Amelia's decision to transition by faking her death as cruel, depicting the emotional devastation her death causes Jesse and their children. Here's the kicker though, we're made to see this pain through Rita's eyes, not Amelia's, who doesn't seem to ever care that she caused this pain at any point in the film.
Yo no quiero esto, no tengo nada que hacer aquí. Why can't we go to my sisters in the States? Te lo ruego.
It's a deeply insidious way of framing Amelia's choice, as if her transition is inherently selfish or irresponsible and damaging to the people around her. And this idea reinforces that cis people understand the consequences of trans people's decisions better than we do, that we're oblivious to it, or worse, don't care about the harm our transitions supposedly cause others. And this is the same transphobic argument TERFs and anti-trans parents use to frame trans kids' transitions as narcissistic stealing of the child that they had, which is then used to justify policies that strip us of our autonomy. First, they block healthcare for trans kids under 18, claiming it's for their own good. Then, as we're seeing in the United States right now, they ban it entirely, branding trans people of any age as self-absorbed and mentally ill.
It will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life.
By framing Amelia's transition as selfish and harmful, the film reinforces the belief that trans lives must always be justified through the lens of cisgender comfort. But even worse, the film links this transition choice to Amelia's controlling nature at the same time, as we see Jesse express anger at the loss of her autonomy by Amelia's posthumous forcing Jesse and the kids to move to Switzerland for their supposed protection. It's decent characterization of showing Amelia is controlling and doesn't care for her family's desires, but it continually links it to her being trans, as well as echoing transphobic narratives. From here, and this is just funny for me, Amelia undergoes all of her gender confirmation surgeries at once. Facial feminization surgery, vaginoplasty, breast augmentation, and maybe more. No doctor would ever do that. It's not safe for one, but also this isn't fucking Captain America where you can just go into a tube and come out suddenly a perfect gender specimen.
Mr. Stark!
God, I wish we lived in that fucking world. Gender transition in the MCU must be fucking wild. There's even a moment where Amelia looks at her vagina immediately post-surgery through a mirror with visible relief. And let's just say in real life, trans people may have emotional relief at this moment, but visually, how do I say this in an algorithm-friendly way? It's more tornado at a deli counter down there for a few months. Sorry, was that too much for you? It looks great now. It looks like a little flower. Anyways, healing from each surgery can take literally up to a year. But Amelia just spends a minute in movie time before she's magically healed and ready to go before she even leaves the hospital. Director Jacques Audiard even admitted he discussed the challenges of surgery healing with trans actress Carla Sofia Gascon, so he knew the reality, but still chose this depiction. And I get the appeal of movie magic, and showing trans surgeries as a quick outpatient procedure would be fine if the film genuinely focused on trans experiences elsewhere, but it doesn't. Instead, it reduces surgery to a quick, easy, one-size-fits-all fix, perpetuating the stigma that surgeries are simple and immediate, rather than the difficult process, both in obtaining access and going through them, that they actually are for trans people. This whole sequence reeks of cisgender hyperfixation on our genitals and surgeries again, reducing it to voyeurism under the guise of a trans narrative. Speaking of time skips though, the movie then jumps ahead 4 years, completely jumping over any chance to see Amelia adjusting to being perceived as a woman. Her joy at it, her struggles, her navigation of a patriarchal society free from her violent past. Instead, we just cut straight to her surprising Rita at a dinner party 4 years down the line.
¿Sabes qué? De hecho, Simon y yo...
Because of course, transness is a surprise. You never know someone is trans. They might just pop up behind you like we're a fucking jump scare.
You're supposed to be the CIA's best. Act like it.
Rita's immediate reaction to Amelia's sudden appearance is fear and anxiety, which is understandable given Amelia's violence towards Rita earlier in the movie and the possibility that she's just here to tie up loose ends by killing Rita.
No me digas que viniste por casualidad. No me digas que viniste por casualidad. Dime que viniste a borrar el pasado. Tu testigo no estoy yo. Por casualidad.
But it also at the same time plays into the harmful trope of discovering someone is trans as seen as inherently scary or dangerous, a fear that is used to justify, again, more violence against trans people, especially by cis men terrified that they'll somehow be made gay or weak by being near us, or God forbid, having sex with us. A fear this movie continually reinforces by linking Amelia's transness to her violent history. That is until moments later where the real reason Amelia has come back emerges. Despite promising to leave Rita alone, she now wants Rita to help bring her children back to Mexico so that she can rebuild a relationship with them.
Necesito que traigas a mis hijos de regreso conmigo a México. No puedo vivir sin ellos.
While Amelia isn't here to be violent, her sudden arrival is a betrayal of her promise to leave Rita alone, so we're left to ask already, has Amelia truly changed in these 4 years, or is she still the same violent, manipulative, and selfish person beneath it all? And this doubt lingers over every scene, as we're forced to see Amelia through an external lens rather than her internal life, constantly juxtaposed with her past self. Once again, we're stuck with Rita's cis perspective, questioning how much Amelia has changed over 4 years without any of the nuance that could have come from actually exploring, you know, her transition, and how it shapes her perception of herself.
La sorpresa más grande de tu vida es ella, no es ella, si es ella. No vine para verme al espejo ni a contarte mi vida.
Which again, would be fine if the film was genuinely interested in questioning Amelia's character as a person who just happens to be trans. But instead, it continually ties her potential duplicity to her transness, as if her identity is inherently linked to her morality. For example, when Rita finally brings Jesse and the kids to Amelia's home, Amelia introduces herself as their aunt.
No nos conocemos, ¿verdad, Jesse?
No, no creo, no.
It's like Mrs. Doubtfire, Gangster Edition. Except instead of comedic hijinks, we're meant to question if this is evidence of Amelia's manipulativeness. The film seems to keep asking over and over and over again, oh look, a trans person lying about her identity. Does this mean she's inherently deceitful because she's always been a criminal inside, despite not looking like one anymore? Goes all the way back to Rita's initial client. But the film shifts from questioning whether appearances dictate how we view someone to suggesting there's something innate in a person's biological nature that they can never escape, framing that earlier scene with Rita less about Rita needing to get over her initial judgments and more about how trans people can supposedly hide our internal truth from others by virtue of being trans. Now, I want to take a step back to analyze why the film is doing this. Because the film's bizarre transphobic approach to Amelia's transition seems, in part, to be an artifact from its source material. Remember way back at the start of this video, don't look at the time code, when I mentioned Amelia Perez was adapted from the book Écoute by Boris Razon? And apologies for my French accent, I know it's terrible. But that's only half true, because this movie is actually based on only a single chapter of that book. Yeah, a single chapter. And in that chapter, a minor character who is a drug trafficker transitions solely as a means of escaping the cartel, not because he's actually trans. Now, already, that's obviously a transphobic concept, right? The idea that trans people aren't actually trans, but they're just trying to escape something or trying to gain access to women's spaces or something. But in director Jacques Audiard's own words,
the author, who is a friend of mine, did not develop this character. I asked for the right to expand the character myself.
But, of course, when a rich French man does it and not a girl on the internet, it's art.
My muse shall not be mocked.
The problem is, Audiard only made a singular surface-level change to the source material. He made Amelia actually earnestly a trans woman. Critic One Barquin, in their review for Little White Lies, summed up the core problem with this perfectly.
A lot of these issues stem from adapting a chapter that is explicitly about a cartel leader using transition as a means of escape. You realize that you might get accused of being transphobic, so you try to smooth it over by hiring a trans actress and revising certain beats without looking at how other parts of the script reflect transness negatively.
So many of the film's transphobic elements, from Amelia cruelly abandoning her family to the focus on whether Amelia is actually a man underneath her change, reflect the source material's core idea that Amelia isn't actually trans. Audiard attempts to smooth it over by shifting the superficial transphobic idea by making Amelia actually trans, but refused to make the fundamental changes that would necessarily follow from that choice. Because if Amelia weren't actually trans, as she is in the book, there's at least a transphobic logic to questioning her transition and if it's evidence of her duplicity. But in a story about an actual trans woman, this framing becomes indefensible. You can no longer use transition as a way to question whether a character is actually moral, because it reinforces harmful stereotypes that cast trans people as inherently deceptive because we're trans. It just highlights how little thought or care Audiard put into portraying transness authentically or empathetically. Honestly, his shallow attempt to cover his tracks without making more meaningful changes offends me more. It shows that he knew enough to avoid outright backlash by aligning with surface-level mainstream understandings of trans people, but didn't care enough to actually engage with or learn from us to make his story good. Instead, he wanted to just tell a story about a character that he found cool in a book once and did the bare minimum to ensure that cis audiences wouldn't call him out, but left the entire transphobic core of the narrative intact. It's frankly fucking lazy. And we can see this in one of the film's most revealing and worst scenes, where Amelia puts one of her kids to bed for the first time since her transition. Gascon delivers a stunning performance in the scene. It's actually her strongest thing in the entire movie, in my opinion, because it captures Amelia's raw conflict as her child expresses how much he misses his dad, and Amelia wrestles with the desire to tell him the truth, that she is his dad. For a brief moment, we actually see Amelia unfiltered, free from the ever-present cisgender gaze that dominates the rest of the film. I mean, shockingly, Audiard restrained from having Rita sitting in the damn room staring at Amelia for us to gawk at her through, which is probably why this scene could have been one of the film's most powerful. But the scene instead becomes the most subtly damaging because despite removing the cis character's explicit questioning of Amelia's intentions, Amelia's child sings about how Amelia smells like his dad, insisting that he can smell her under her perfume.
Hueles como papá. Hueles a las montañas, a cuero y café. Hueles a la comida, picante, picante. Hueles a azúcar, al cordero de fuego, al olor.
Okay, several things here. First off, we're just gonna gloss over the fact that apparently the kid has magical smell powers and can smell all of that shit, but also, This scene makes it glaringly obvious that no one involved in writing this film did even the barest minimum of talking to trans people while writing it. Because if they had, they know one of the first and most notable changes of HRT is that our smell changes. I'm not trying to be like comedically over the top here, like it actually is wild to me, because before hormones gave me softer skin or redistributed my fat or even gave me boobs, I noticed that I smell different. It's just a weird thing that happens that you just kind of notice. And so this entire song is not only just ignorant, it showcases their insulting laziness. But the deeper, more infuriating issue here is how this moment anchors itself in biological essentialism in order to question Amelia's identity. All of the smells that the child lists are very much tied to Amelia's former masculine identity. It clings to this insidious belief that some immutable biological trait will forever define who Amelia really is. Undermining her identity and framing her transition is just a superficial mask over an unchangeable truth. No matter how much she's changed, she still smells like a man. You can't remove that stink, I guess. The film all but shouts that no matter how much she transitions, no matter how much she presents herself, she's still, at her core, biologically a man. This isn't just invalidating, it's a gut punch to any trans person watching, reinforcing the idea that we'll never truly escape the boxes cisgender society forces us into, no matter how much we change. And by the way, if you're curious, in this video, I explained that trans women are not biological males because, like all humans, we have numerous biological and social traits, some, like fucking smell, that are mutable, some that are not, that patriarchy forcibly categorizes underneath male and female binaries. But we can't stop there with this scene, because the suggestion that a child can sense a parent's true identity leans into conservative rhetoric about biological bonds and parental rights, narratives weaponized to control trans people and women generally. It props up the idea that there's a magical biological familial bond that often confines women to caregiving roles, saying that women just know naturally how to be mothers, tethering their value to biology while erasing their autonomy and a desire to have them just keep pumping out babies. It's all the same rhetoric often used by TERFs and anti-trans parents who say that parents know their trans child's true identity better than they do, and thus justify limiting access to trans care.
I know who I am, and I want to be who I am, and I want you to love me for that.
Honey, I love you.
You love the girl that you gave birth to.
God gave you this amazing body, and you want to change it.
So the scene that could have been truly beautiful instead sends a chilling message to cisgender audiences. Don't trust trans people. Don't listen to what they have to say, because deep down, they'll always be the person that you knew they were in your gut. And this exact concept, it's the thread that will weave through the entire rest of the movie. Buckle up. At this point in the film, Amelia, while out with Rita, starts noticing family members of cartel violence victims searching for their loved ones. Amelia starts to feel guilt at her past actions as a cartel leader, and so starts to use her connection with incarcerated cartel members to create a nonprofit aimed at identifying the bodies of cartel victims. And this could have been really compelling because it introduces a storyline not tied to Amelia's transness for once, one that could have explored whether Amelia has truly changed. Her guilt is evident, but the nonprofit also garners her fame and public veneration, raising the interesting question, is she still benefiting from the very violence she once inflicted without ever actually taking accountability for it? In a better movie, this could have been a great turning point where Amelia confronted the repercussions of her violent past. What if families of her victims that she is currently helping discovered that Amelia was the one responsible for their loved ones' deaths? And if the film wanted to explore transness within that, perhaps these families, while rightfully angry, weaponized transphobia against her out of anger, forcing Amelia to grapple with both her actions and the bigotry that she now faces as a trans woman. It could have been a really nuanced narrative about accountability, transness, and how patriarchal cis-heteronormative societies entice men to violence and then absolve them until they're marginalized. Imagine a version of Amelia's story where she's forced to rightfully take account for her violent past, but only does so because her history was discovered after she acted on guilt that she can now fully feel. A guilt which only emerges because she lives in an identity that society allows her to be more in touch with her emotions within. And at the same time, she would have had to navigate that accountability in a world that not only holds her to a different trans-misogynistic standard, but is also deeply hostile to her very existence as a trans woman. Hell, you could have even gone wild with it and talked about how trans women often tend to be the victims of cartel violence, meaning that she could have actually faced violence as a trans woman by the very people that she used to pal around with as a dude. That would have been such a wildly interesting and cool storyline to explore. But sadly, that's not what we get. Instead, Amelia calls on her corrupt politician friends from her pre-transition life to fund her nonprofit, leading to a song where Rita points out the shocking revelation that the upper class of the city is corrupt. Wait, sorry, what? Movie, you're blowing my mind. You're saying rich people are bad? What a groundbreaking critique of capitalism. Amelia never at any point has to confront the harm that she caused. Instead, we get some small, petty moments, like Rita complimenting Amelia's outfit, only for Amelia to not return the compliment, prompting Rita to mutter bitch under her breath.
Magnífica. ¿Y yo?
It's yet another shallow attempt to make us question whether Amelia is a self-centered narcissist, masquerading as progressively provocative because Rita called her a bitch, affirming Amelia's gender in a sexist way. Wow, how edgy. Meanwhile, it completely sidesteps any meaningful or complex exploration of Amelia's culpability for her past actions in organized crime. Hell, if you still wanted to show that Amelia was a shit person and not someone who actually grew after she transitioned, you could have her just tell people, oh, well, I don't have to be held accountable because they're just transphobic. They're only angry at me because I'm a trans person, and never actually take accountability for actions. That would have showed a transgender person who is morally a piece of shit, without it actually being because she's trans. Oh, and by the way, Rita serves no real narrative purpose in the second half of the movie, if she ever even had one. It kind of underscores how she was only ever created to facilitate cisgender gawking. And this is why I'm not just offended as a trans person here, though I am that, I'm also offended as a fellow filmmaker and writer. There was so much potential here to create a nuanced portrait of a trans character and relate that to a complex societal issue. And putting all these clearly talented artists to work all on a movie to say shit that only goes as deep as rich people bad. It fucking just offends me as a filmmaker. The only other storyline to come out of this plot thread is even worse. A victim of cartel violence, Ifania Flores visits Amelia's nonprofit while hiding a knife. And at first, the film makes it seem like she might be there to attack Amelia, possibly having uncovered her past. But no, she's just there to figure out what happened to her husband after she got a notification that the nonprofit knew where he was, bringing her knife along to kill him if he was alive because he had subjected her to years of abuse. Amelia in the scene coldly and dismissively tells Flores that her husband is dead.
¿Dónde está?
Por ahora no.
Es en la morgue.
Está muerto.
Reinforcing her characterization as a emotionless narcissist, and only softens after seeing Flores' surprising relief at the news. Amelia even goes to comfort Flores, and the two even actually seem to bond. And then the two begin to have a sexual relationship because, of course, Amelia can't just earnestly want to take care of someone, she just wants to have sex. And normally, I would love to see a trans-inclusive lesbian relationship in movies, but the film desperately wants to frame this through the lens of Amelia's own violent past. It practically screams at the audience to ask, is Amelia just as violent and abusive as the man that Flores was so relieved to escape? We even get this shot of Amelia hugging Flores, where we as the audience are meant to question how sincere her hug actually is, or if she's just using Flores so that she can enter into a sexual relationship. And this just goes to show how insidious this transphobic framing has become, because by this point, there's no need for Rita to be there to explicitly cast out. The movie has already done the legwork to train the audience to question Amelia's motives as inherently suspect. The camera, and thereby the film itself, assumes the audience is already ready to mistrust Amelia as a given. We even later learn that despite having a relationship with Flores and being the closest person to Amelia besides Rita, Amelia never tells Flores that she's trans or that her kids are not really her cousins as she tells everyone else.
¿Tienes hijos?
Sí. Bueno, no.
papá murió. Yo soy su tío.
So again, transness is being tied to duplicitousness, and Amelia is shown as not caring for the people around her. And to be clear, Amelia doesn't have to tell anyone that she's trans. But this insidious questioning of a trans person's motive in a sexual relationship echoes the same transphobic garbage that TERFs use to justify excluding trans women from women's spaces, painting our very existences within them as a threat. Transphobes continually claim that trans women are just violent, sexually perverted men lying about who we are to gain access to women's spaces in order to sexually lure and even sexually assault women within them.
You know, if someone with a penis is in the women's locker room, that's not okay. And I'm a victim of abuse myself. I'm a rape survivor. I have PTSD from the abuse I've suffered at the hands of a man. And I know how vulnerable women and girls are in private spaces. So I'm absolutely 100% going to stand in the way of any man who wants to be in a women's restroom, in our locker rooms, in our changing rooms. I will be there fighting you every step of the way.
They even say that we are inherently rapists if we sleep with a cis woman and don't disclose that we're trans, which is a view that's now enshrined in UK law through the new Crown Protection Service's guidelines. But this ignores the reality that trans women are far more likely to be victims of sexual and domestic abuse, often at the hands of partners who react violently to discovering we're trans. Hence why some trans women don't disclose that they're trans with their partners initially. This narrative also cruelly denies us access to spaces that we desperately need, like just the bathroom or women's shelters. Like literally, Queen TERF herself, J.K. Rowling, opened up a women's shelter not in order to help women, but just so that she could proudly virtue signal that she was excluding trans women from it. But she just did it to be a petty, cruel person, because transphobia breaks people's fucking brains. And this hateful rhetoric has driven so much of the surge of anti-trans laws targeting public spaces like bathrooms, all under the guise of protecting cis women. It's fear-mongering meant to strip us of safety and autonomy and force us back into the closet, or worse, push us to die in the shadows. By having us question if Amelia is lying in order to sleep with a cis female victim of abuse, the film is regurgitating TERF and conservative narratives that dehumanize us, all to reduce Amelia's story to a shallow question of whether or not she has truly changed. And this, finally, brings us to the moment where the audience's growing mistrust is finally paid off by the film. Throughout the movie, Amelia has started to build up a new relationship to her ex-wife, Jessie, as a woman. Because Jessie thinks Amelia is her dead husband's sister, not her dead husband, Jessie begins to open up to Amelia, revealing that Jessie had complex feelings about her husband, but ultimately did love him. It's a tender scene where Amelia wrestles with the clear pain she's caused Jessie through her neglect and implied abuse, despite supposedly loving her. One of the few times in the film where we...
No sé. Después de que los niños wasn't the same anymore.
¿Para ti o para él?
Para él.
¿Y eso te entristeció?
Estaba solo.
But we also learn that Jessie cheated on Amelia in the scene, and that reveal is less centered on Jessie opening up and more a moment for the audience to wonder if Amelia will reveal her true self by showcasing anger upon learning of Jessie's infidelity. If Amelia will finally throw off the mask and say, "Ha, I was your dead husband all along."
¿Lo engañaste? ¿Con quién?
¿Por qué me preguntas eso?
Más por saber.
But Amelia doesn't. And we're actually meant to take that as an indicator of Amelia's potential growth. But we also, at this point in the movie, start getting songs showcasing Jessie's interior life. Something, by the way, Amelia never gets to do on her own terms without anyone else present. Jessie's songs, though, reveal her growing anger and frustration at her husband's control, even in death. She feels trapped, forced to stay in her dead husband's supposed sister's house in order to access his money that she should have been given upon his death. So, and I just gotta tell you this because it was very funny for me. In a moment of frustration, she calls Gustavo, the man that she cheated on Amelia with back in the day, and says, and I kid you not,
Gustavo, tú eres la única persona por quien lo vi.
God. That has to be one of the most straight man writing a woman line I've ever heard. Like, absolutely fucking cringe. Please, someone contact r/men writing women. One of your posts has gotten loose. It's right there next to she titted boobily down the stairs. Rita eventually catches Jesse with Gustavo while they're out at a karaoke bar singing a song written for the film called El Camino, which contains lyrics like, and I have to sing these myself because I don't want to get copyright infringement. I want to love myself fully, to love myself as I am. That's what being a woman is, right? The song is better than that, but the song clearly carries trans femme undertones, lyrics that resonate deeply with the idea of self-acceptance and womanhood, especially for those who've had to fight for their identity. It's given to the cis character, and not the trans one, but okay. But alright, it's a decently fine trans-coded anthem. And it's also one of the main Selena Gomez songs used to market the movie. So the film clearly wants us to view it as significant in some way. But its placement here feels weird. The song comes from Jesse, not Amelia, in a moment intentionally hidden from Amelia. And given the movie's constant questioning of Amelia's womanhood and the guilt that she carries from her past violence, the song's lyrics themselves seem to be implying that Amelia, by failing to love herself fully, isn't truly a woman. It's a bizarre, uncomfortable implication, especially given the fact that many trans women actually deal with internalized self-hate because society tells us to hate ourselves, and it requires a Herculean effort just to have any sort of, self-acceptance, let alone love for ourselves. And it's especially more bizarre considering that this song is being used to sell the supposedly trans movie. It feels like the film is saying